Today on Between the Lines, what happens when the unthinkable happens, with my guest, Gary Grossman. Welcome, I'm Barry Kibrick. Gary has been a past guest on this show with his books Executive Actions and Executive Treason. Now with his latest in the series, an ebook called Executive Command, he once again takes a fictional situation that is so close to reality, it cannot be ignored.
I'm a writer today because I was a reader when I was 11 years old, and it was...
You do not need to prove your state of happiness to anybody.
Most of these speeches were as much as a month in preparation.
Characters, the heroes in this book, are seekers of truth in a story that involves a lot of corruption.
I don't get a chance to really talk about what's real, and it's the perfect for me.
Gary, welcome back to the show. It is a pleasure to see you again and have you here as a guest.
Thanks, Barry. It is a treat for me. It's my third time, and I don't know, that must put me somewhere in...
Well, it's the charm, as they say.
Is there a secret handshake now?
Gary, you know, this is, I told people the other episode I did with an ebook was by choice, because you turned me on to this ebook, because your book is only an ebook. So people will be able to simply download it, and that's why they don't see any other books here. That's an interesting thing now, publishing just on the E-level.
Well, it's a new thing for me with the new releases of the Executive Series and Executive Command, originally now coming out as an ebook. I felt it was time that I'd either, well, put it this way, I have had in an office this picture of the New York Central train, classic 1930s poster with the engine barreling down, and I always thought you're either on the train or you're under it. And in terms of publishing, in many ways now, being on the train means you're a hybrid author. You can be in print, you can have ebooks, you can have books on demand, you can have audiobooks, and Executive Command is an original ebook. There will be books on demand being printed, and I also just learned that it's coming out as a audiobook. But it's so quick and so easy to make changes even in a manuscript. We can be published and catch something and go back and fix it. It's right out there again.
Oh, that is, and I'm finding it a blessing even how I have to do my work. So it is going to be an interesting transition as we see.
It makes it easier for you as a host?
Definitely, by far, because you know what, when I highlight my notes, it sends it up to the cloud and then comes back down on my computer, and I don't have to transcribe everything. So for me, it's terrific. It's terrific.
Well, welcome to the new world of publishing.
Well, now let's get into Executive Command, and I want to let people know this is a fictional tale, but we are not discussing any aspect of it as fiction, because what you always do in Executive Actions and Treason is you bring such an important subject so close to reality, it almost will confuse people if they have to wonder about who we're talking about. But the issue and the topic is imperative. So would you want to give a quick little author's blurb just to let people know?
Sure. I'll start, and I'll even start with what we have right here, because the book is about our most valuable and most vulnerable natural resource, and that's our water supply. We live in a world where there are more than 156,000 independent water sources and supplies in this country serving the population, most of them unregulated, unsupervised, unprotected. So Executive Command deals with that basic fact in a world that I've created, a contemporary world, but that world is really a very threatened world. And as I have a sip of water now, and as viewers have a sip of water, you just think, what happens if it's maybe too dangerous or too scary to drink the water that you rely on from the time you wake up in the morning and through the coffee and everything that you cook with? And maybe the water isn't poisoned everywhere, but the threat that it isn't safe is what Executive Command's about.
And that is why I said it is, because of the setting and the terrorism involved and the way, as a former journalist, you know how to tie these things together, I say we can talk about it as, not that as if it's happened, but at least we can discuss it as the potential and what we need to do when you think of the unthinkable, as you put it in the book.
And I love that you glommed onto that, because as a writer, I really try to think the unthinkable. And we've seen the unthinkable in this country. It was the impetus for me to begin writing this series, starting with Executive Actions. We live in a 24/7 noise cycle. A lot of people call it news cycle. I call it a noise cycle as well, because you can't cross the street if you're a politician or the president or Speaker of the House or whatever without it being reported one way or another. And so much of what fills the airwaves isn't really important. There's almost no filter now. So serious things often get put aside, and they go to maybe local radio or conspiracy theorists, or they go to individuals doing a video on the YouTube. And sometimes big stories bubble up that way rather than starting from up above.
Well, and you let us know in here there is a tremendous amount to do with the media, and as you call it, the vacuous state that it's in, because it puts us in danger by being that way. It adds to the problem.
Well, it sure does. We used to have, and if you go back to the age of, an era of Edward R. Murrow and Walter Cronkite and Huntley Brinkley, to some extent it was like you were a Ford family or you were a Chevy family or a GM family. You went to the people that you believed in, but there was basically one set of facts, and it was reported by NBC or CBS or ABC. These days, so much of the news is not about facts, it's opinion. And it's populist voices rather than authoritative voices, and we go to people we tend to believe. So when you have a threat that's so serious as the threat in executive command, based on a reality that could happen and that we're really unprepared for, something like that may take too long for it to become really known by the public.
Well, you use these words, and I think this sums it up perfectly. It's right in the very beginning. A lie can travel halfway around the world while the truth is pulling its boots on.
Mark Twain.
Is that who that was?
Yeah,
it was
it's
Mark
been
Twain.
attributed to various people, but I think it originated with Mark Twain. It's one of my Mark Twain. It's one of my favorite quotes.
Well, you described it just perfectly by what you just said, because that's what could happen with if we're not careful. The lie could be, and we won't even know what's going on until it's, well, in your case, could be too late. Could be too late.
Right. Executive command as a threat begins at a local level, and when you really look at how vulnerable our water supplies are, it's extremely difficult to poison, whether it's biotoxins or chemical toxins, a large reservoir. The water really is in four categories. It comes to us in four categories: the supplier, the source. It then goes to treatment, then to storage, and finally to distribution. At its source, it's very hard to have an impact on it, unless it's a well. But there are hundreds of thousands of wells in the country feeding or supplying 25 people to 25 people. That's a great source to hit if you want to have an impact and create a scare or to create illness or death. Then you have to kind of go further down the line to the distribution. And once again, we're vulnerable. We're vulnerable maybe at a water tank, but more likely in a hospital, in a water container, or pumping biotoxins or chemical weapons into a fire hydrant that serves a number of blocks in a number of areas. There are there's probably more than 1.2 million fire hydrants in this country that you can just go down to. I must say, executive command is not a primer for someone
you would not be
go
able,
forward. Yeah. But attacking the water supplies in the United States is lesson number 16 in the Al-Qaeda terrorist handbook.
And in this case, you bring in a gentleman, and this is the only time two times I'll mention the name, Scott Rourke, because he's him and President Taylor, they're the ones that have been through the executive series. And you bring him in because he's the one type of guy that can think the unthinkable, that can look, as you say, for connections that no one else might recognize. And if this is already, I'm glad to know that if it's published in that Al-Qaeda handbook, then we're already at least aware of it. But he's able to at least see how to connect the dots.
And the dots are very tiny at first because they're not being reported on a large scale by the major networks, and they begin literally, no pun intended, bubbling up in local communities or little pieces that begin being put together. As a writer, as a consumer of political thrillers, I love James Bond. I love what Clancy does, and Dale Brown, who's been on your show many times. They have great heroes who are like Superman in their area. I'm more of a believer that it takes one person who figures part of it out and another person who figures another part and another person, and they damn well better be talking to one another. And if they haven't found a way to talk to one another, they should, because that's the way real things happen in this world. And it's the way that an attack on our water supplies would really be understood or known. Most doctors in rural hospitals are not prepared to deal with, notice, or even investigate illnesses that may come in separate areas from poisoned water.
Well, you say, does it have to be mass destruction to be effective? And obviously the answer is no.
Ultimately, if we live in a world or a country where the threat of whether or not this is safe to drink, and it's what I explore in Executive Command, that threat alone can create panic. It can affect the stock market. It will certainly drive water off the shelves. And then where do you begin to look for water? The other real world element in Executive Command that I love dealing with and finding out about, and our bad guy, terrorist, lives in a place called Ciudad del Este, Paraguay. Now, where is that? It's not necessarily a place I want to visit right away, although the great Iguazu waterfalls are nearby. But Ciudad del Este is at the tri-border of Paraguay, Brazil, and Argentina. It is considered the most dangerous spot in the Western Hemisphere, home to Hezbollah, Hamas, Japanese, Chinese, Korean gangs, MS-13 gangs that exist in the United States. It also sits above the Guiana or Guyana water aquifer, the largest freshwater aquifer in the Western Hemisphere, if not the world. That is a real world beat in Executive Command, because if the water is not safe in the United States and our terrorist is involved in its poisoning, but he's actually sitting on top of the freshest water supply, it's not only a terrorism story, it ties in a business story. And everything in a geopolitical world's really interrelated now.
Say geopolitical, this is the one thing though that I'm not arguing with you about, because
the water is good, by the way.
Thank God. But you know, there's a part of the role of government that I want to discuss with you here, because that also is a large part of what's in here. And what's interesting is liberty versus security. And you bring that out in a number of places. And I remember Ben Franklin, I'm going to read it. Any society that would give up a little liberty to gain a little security will deserve neither and lose both. So this puts a very interesting crimp. And when the president says in the book, stay at home, we're taking care of it, it sparks something in me. And I thought, are we that separate from our government? Weren't we designed, according to Lincoln, to be a government of the people, by the people, for the people? Right now, in Executive Command and in the real world, there is this tremendous separation between us and the powers that be. Yes. And it, I find, is more disturbing than any act of terrorism.
Wow, that is a profound observation, and it is truly one of the undercurrents in what I write. I'll back into it. There are members of my family, extended family who, after reading Executive Command and the other book, think I'm a diehard Republican demanding that we have the ability to go anywhere and do anything for the sake of our position in the world. And I've been accused in Amazon reviews for the ebook why my politics are so apparent. I obviously watch MSNBC all day long. That confusion from a reader's point of view, I think, is to some extent what you're looking at. I don't want my politics to be up front. I would love to have a president who, in the books and in the real world, is the president of the United States, not the president of the Democratic Party or the Republican Party, but a president of the United States. We have the guarantee of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. But we can't control all that if America is not protected and unsafe or not looked after. So that fundamental and profound, I use the word profound again, observation that you have is that there are things that are out of our control, things that need to be regulated. I'll back up even. Guantanamo, good issue. It's been in the news once again. President Obama said that he was going to close it. Even President Bush said we need to close Guantanamo. I'm convinced that no matter what happens on the campaign and what anybody is saying on the campaign, the day you're elected and you're sworn in, you raise your hand and your hand's on the Bible and you're being sworn in, right after that somebody comes up to you and says, "Psst, Mr. President, can I talk to you a little bit? There's something I need to show you. There's something that now that you're cleared for all this intelligence, we have to tell you." I'm sure whether it's terrorism, things in the paranormal that we don't understand or agree or don't agree with, or dangers and threats to our city or our water supplies, the president gets an earful right after being elected president. And that's why some promises actually don't come to fruition.
But what about the role of the citizenry? Why are we left to stay at home? Or in the case of 9/11, just go shopping? We are a society that has been self-reliant for many years. Now, I'm not saying that we should be able to have nuclear weapons and, the government obviously has a role and it must regulate things and all of that. But to remove the citizenry from solving the problem and helping with the issue, that's the one thing that's a little interesting to me. See, I think there's room for the citizenry to be a part of the solution, not just the government.
Well, in the case of executive command, the president does ask everyone to cool your jets, basically, calm down, because we don't want to let everyone know what we're doing because it will let the enemy know what we're doing. And that the time for you to be a good citizen is now by staying indoors and not protesting, not rioting, not going to the streets, not picking up guns, because this enemy is basically as invisible right now as looking into the water. And it looks good, it smells good, it tastes good, and it can kill you. That's what the president is calling for, because at that point, in fact, the president in executive command is late to understanding what the problem is. The readers find out much sooner than anybody, including Scott Rourke in his investigation. By the time the president learns, he's really learned because of a kid who's posted a video on YouTube. In fact, for a book trailer, which is on YouTube for executive command, I recreate that scene. I work with some great young filmmakers who said, tell that scene as a book trailer to promote executive command through this youngster named Kyle Glasgow.
Hello, I'm Kyle Glasgow. I live in Nebraska. Just gonna give you a quick tour of my home here. We don't have a lot of people living in the world, maybe 5,000 or so. There's gonna be a lot less soon. It's the outside world. I'll show you more of the inside. That is my father, Doug Glasgow. I love him. He's dead. My mom's name is, well, was Sheila. She's also dead. My little sister and brother, well, they're not dead yet, but they will be soon. I just want you to know that I didn't do this. I tried calling for help, but 911 is pretty busy. I guess we weren't the only ones who got sick really fast. I gotta get this uploaded soon. Please tweet it, forward it, send it to everyone that you know. I think it has something to do with what we ate here. Maybe you can find out. You want to hear something crazy? I wanted to be a movie director.
It is chilling and raw and gritty, and in dying as a character, he becomes the thing that he wanted to be. That's what reaches ultimately the White House and tells the White House to wake up.
So again, I'm not so far off.
No,
it
you're
is
not.
the citizenry that must be still involved at any level.
Absolutely right.
I want to switch this for a second because there's a term you use that I've always enjoyed thinking about. Not the term, but what it means. The term I haven't heard before, and it's called God wink. And I don't know if it is a term that's around or
Yes,
is
it
it
is.
was. And you said how people should pay attention to powerful coincidences.
Well, I'll give credit where credit is due. And an author you may want to meet, and perhaps an individual you already know. God Wink is a series of books created by and written by a man named Squire Rushnell.
Oh gosh.
Okay?
Squire Rushnell
From
was
ABC,
I know
correct.
Squire.
Well,
but it's funny, I didn't realize that was where that came from.
There you go. And it's those coincidences in life that you need to look at as you go through life. And he calls them God winks. I have a God wink in his first book that he wrote about, and it was about when I was writing the book on the Superman TV show, Superman Serial to Serial, and I walked down the street in Hollywood Boulevard researching the book, picked up a T-shirt for a big Superman S on it, walked out of that store. I lived in Boston at the time I was out here, dropped the bag that carried the shirt, and it landed directly on top of the star on the Hollywood Walk of Fame for George Reeves, the man who was Superman on television. So I wrote that up as a story, and he published it in the first God Winks book. But it's a wonderful way of describing those little quirks and apply faith to it or coincidence. And again, that's how things, it's what we used to call it, a harmonic convergence. It just happens. It's just there.
You know, our time is almost up. I can't believe it. It seems like we're just getting into this. I want, because you promised that you would converse with viewers if they wrote you, I want to give them your website because I think they're going to find the concepts and things raising, like I am, questions that they want to ponder. And it's www. Very easy, Gary Grossman, GaryGrossman.com. And I want to follow up on that for a second because the line that took me was, we're quite reactive rather than proactive. And yet at the same time I was thinking, and again, it goes back to liberty. How proactive can you be? How reactive must you be? So again, it's constantly posing questions that we have to deal with as individuals and as, on the macro level, a society.
I didn't say it in the book, but your explanation really is making me realize it's a partnership. It's a partnership between the citizenry and the government. Us as people and the people who we elect and have lead. And maybe we all should be talking about that partnership.
Well, I'm going to talk about it right now because our time is up, and I'm going to end with these words about the government, in this case, the Navy SEALs. You say this: take away all the equipment. The SEALs remained a lethal force because each of the SEALs stood by the basic special ops truth. Humans are more important than hardware, quality is better than quantity. Thank you, Gary, for sharing the quality of your knowledge with us today.
Thank you, and thanks for joining the ebook world as well, Barry.
Oh, it's my pleasure, and thank you all for joining us. Now, before Gary leaves, I'd like to leave you with these words from Executive Command. Why was the most important follow-up question any reporter could ask? Why was exactly what he expected? Why hadn't been asked enough in recent years? And it was hardly ever answered honestly. I'm Barry Kibrick. What's even more important than the whys are what lies between the questions that are hardly ever asked or answered honestly. Thank you so much, Gary.
Thank you, Barry.
My pleasure.
To be back.
My pleasure.
If you'd like to get in touch with us, want a DVD or transcript of our show, catch an episode online, or receive our weekly updates, go to www.klcs.org/VTL.
Closed captioning is made possible by The Intelligent Optimist, your source for stories and events about possibilities and solutions. Get to know our magazine and visit us at theoptimist.com. Intelligent optimism, a way of life.
This enemy is basically as invisible right now as looking into the water, and it looks good, it smells good, it tastes good, and it can kill you.
On this episode of Between the Lines, what happens when the unthinkable happens? With my guest, Gary Grossman. With his book, Executive Command, he once again takes a fictional situation that is so close to reality, it cannot be ignored.